gathering us this morning. We thank you for the gift of compassion for our brothers and sisters, the wisdom to address the problems that we find present in the world, present because of our fallen state. We ask you to guide us, guide all that we say and do, and bless us as we go forward. We ask this as we ask all things through Christ our Lord. Amen. Good morning. Good morning. I'm Father Marcus Pollard. I'm the pastor here at St. Anthony's, and I'm not one of the presenters, so I have to do something that's very difficult for me, which is to talk very little. But I wanted to welcome you, Bishop, Father Creed, members of the panel, and all of you for coming. There's no way to overstate the importance of the need to address the issue of poverty in general and especially hunger. As the Bishop pointed out in the sermon, the need that we have to be attentive to the concerns of our brothers and sisters. And this is fundamental to the gospel. As St. John said, how can we love the Lord who we don't see if we don't love our brothers and sisters who we can see? So without further ado, I'm actually not going to be here, so Bishop, if you don't mind, I'm going to head off to do other things here at the parish. But I just want to welcome all of you. Just a practical thing, the restrooms are just out here in the lobby. And if there are any needs or anything comes up, I'll just be over in the parish office. So, welcome.
Father Carla, thank you very much for your welcome and for your hospitality to us all. I certainly understand how a pastor these days, every day, but especially on Saturday, has much to do. So you go with our understanding and our blessing. Thank you. Again, brothers and sisters, I want to welcome you. This is our 14th annual Peace Symposium. I mentioned at Mass and echo now my gratitude to Father Creed and to all the members of our Commission for Justice and Peace. I'm very grateful also to those people who assisted in preparing the room today and our refreshments. None of those things happen by chance. They happen because people have to coordinate them and plan them and execute them. And so many people do things that are quietly done, and we don't know that, but behind the scenes they are mighty, mighty helpers. So I thank each of them and thank each of you for taking part. As Father Paul had mentioned, there are many needs in the world. Indeed, there are. There are such crying needs that touch all our hearts in so many arenas. But among them certainly is the hunger. We can tend sometimes to forget that. Most of us are not hungry. And we can become almost forgetful and oblivious to what can happen really down the street in a neighboring place, certainly in this country, and of course beyond in so many ways. So I'm very grateful that we are addressing the issue of hunger today, and very grateful we have Reverend David Beckman here to assist us. As you saw, his topic is feeding the hungry, the needs, and root causes. So you didn't come to hear me today. You've already heard me anyway at Mass. But so I'm going to move aside too and join all of you in welcoming David Beckman, Reverend David Beckman. I don't know, Father Creed, did you want to say something further, perhaps? I think someone's going to introduce David, so, but if you'd like to say something, we'd always love to hear your dulcet tone. Now, I'm going to stay for the talk, and then I'm going to slip out. That's not in protest. It's because there are other things awaiting me today that I need to prepare for, and if I don't get them done soon, it'll be disaster. We can't have disaster. So if I slip away, that's why I've slipped away. Again, many blessings, and one last thing, keep me in your prayers, as I do all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop, for your words, your homily this morning. It sets a context of compassion for all we do. And thank him for his support of the Peace and Justice Commission. He meets with us every year. We have a retreat together where we get motivated, and I appreciate his time and support. The focus today is on hunger, and we have done the welcoming keynote presentation, scheduled for 10, more or less, and we have set aside an hour and 15 minutes for the presentation and some question and answer. We will follow that up with a panel, and I want to have the members of the Peace and Justice Commission present with us to stand, and I want Bob Moore to come forward. The Peace and Justice Commission members, come on. I know you're humble, but you are there. And Corinne is in the background there. She's one of our chief staff support with the Multicultural Office of the Diocese. Bob Moore is one of our fearless leaders in our Peace and Justice Commission, and I would like him to give you a little introduction to David Beckman.
Thank you, Father Jerry. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Reverend David Beckman, the President of Bread for the World. Bread for the World is a collective Christian voice urging our nation's decision makers to end hunger at home and abroad. It is one of the largest organizations in the world dedicated to building the political will to end hunger. I've been privileged to know David and admire his work for over 20 years. You have a short bio of David in your program. I'm not going to repeat what's in there, but let me give you a few additional details. David is a Lutheran pastor as well as an economist. He earned degrees from Yale University, Christ Seminary, and the London School of Economics, and he has received honorary doctorates from 6 universities. In 2010, he was awarded the World Food Prize, the foremost international award recognizing the achievements of individuals who have advanced human development by improving the quality, quantity, or availability of food in the world. Prior to joining Bread for the World, David worked for 15 years at the World Bank, overseeing large development projects and driving innovations that make the bank more effective in reducing poverty. He has lived in Bangladesh and Ghana, overseeing projects in Bolivia and Ecuador, and has visited some 70 countries. David has been asked to testify numerous times before the Congress, appearing before such committees as the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee. He has appeared on Bill Moyer's Journal, PBS's Religion and Ethics News Weekly, CNN Espanol, and C-SPAN, and in written interviews with NPR's Morning Edition and the Diane Reeves Show. He has written many books and articles, including his latest book, Exodus from Hunger, We Are Called to Change the Politics of Hunger. Please join me in welcoming Reverend David Beckman.
And then the other thing I wanted to technically, if I come down there, can you? I think I can see you better if I come down here, and maybe you can see me better too. I'm really honored to be invited to speak with you this morning. Bishop, I'm super honored that you're staying to hear my talk. I'll try to do a good job. And mostly I'm excited by who you are. I mean, what kind of people take a good Saturday morning and come to think about hunger and the need of hunger and how we can overcome hunger? Well, it's salt of the earth people. And I know that's who you are. You are people who are grounded in God's love and pushing to change the world for God. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. So I am sure that the time that we spend together at this event will yield rich fruit. We will all be encouraged to even deeper commitment. We'll be smarter about our strategies. Maybe we'll be more hopeful for actually being able to move toward the end of hunger in our country and around the world. I'm going to talk I'm a Lutheran preacher, but I love Catholic social teaching. I bet I spend more time with Catholic social teaching than a few Catholics. And so I'm going to talk quite a bit this morning about Catholic social teaching, especially what the Catholic Church teaches about hunger, because you have a really rich and powerful and on-target tradition. I want to start by talking about Pope Francis, and then talk about hunger, what we know about hunger, what we know about how to overcome hunger. And then, because Bread for the World is an advocacy organization, I want to talk specifically about advocacy. I think that's an area of ministry that the churches, we do okay, but we could do better in that area. And it's key if we're actually going to make progress against hunger and end the problem of hunger in our time. So let me start with the joy of the gospel. How many of you have read Joy of the Gospel? Yeah, okay. Well, so I want to give you my take on Joy of the Gospel. If you have not read this book, whether you're a Catholic or not, get this book. This is my favorite book of the last year. I just think this was just off the chart. And you can get it if you just Google the Joy of the Gospel. You can get it from the Conference of Catholic Bishops. That's one source, real quick source to get a copy. So I want to talk about Joy of the Gospel, and then more specifically what Pope Francis is teaching us about hunger. So if I don't get this quite right, you can correct me in the questions. But I'm just going to tell you how David Beckman read the Joy of the Gospel. First, the bishop and I got a chance to talk for just a minute. Pope Francis, the person, has been such a gift to the world. What a gift to the world. His election really is evidence of the Spirit of the Lord alive in our time. And I think what's really, his spontaneity, he's sort of a lot like Jesus. And whoa, who expected that? A pope that behaves a lot like Jesus. It's not easy to be in a position like that and be spontaneous and pastoral, but he does that. And then with the Joy of the Gospel, what he says is that the first truth, he says, the foundational truth, is God's grace and mercy, God's love for all of us that we know, that we experience, that was won through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That is the foundation. And this Pope has a sense of himself as a forgiven sinner who's been called to this work despite his own failings. If you read the interview he did right after he became Pope, it was published in America Magazine. It's still worth getting. And in answer, the first question was, who should we say you are? And reportedly, the Pope paused and he said, I'm a sinner. And he talked about a painting by Caravaggio. If you see the painting, you'll recognize it. It's Jesus pointing at Levi. And the finger of Jesus is right in the center of the painting. And so Pope Francis feels that he is Levi. He's the tax collector. And that that Jesus pointed at him. That's who this Pope is. Somebody who has a sense of God's abundant mercy and grace and forgiveness in his own life. And so then from that, he said, this joy, this experience of God's, I would call it God's embrace, gives us so much joy that we want to share it. And so then all the rest of the exhortation is about ways to share the joy of the gospel. This is David now, this isn't the book, but I've really been struck over, it sort of dawned on me just a few years ago how many people go to church every Sunday and don't experience the joy of the gospel. The cross is right there, but they don't experience. They're not sure that God. They're not even sure that God's really alive, and they certainly maybe feel guilty, or that God seems remote, even though they're in church. So what you said this morning about evangelization and the connection between what we're doing this morning to sharing the gospel is really right. So Pope Francis then goes on to talk about how we share the gospel. And he's got some really, the funniest passage in my mind is a fairly long section of instructions to Catholic priests on how to preach a good sermon. And he goes into some detail on this, on how you should, you can't just wing it on Sunday morning, you got to work. But he goes, so it's very practical about, something that needs to happen to share the joy of the gospel. He talks, there's some challenging passages about, for somebody who's involved trying to move Congress on these issues, he says that's not good enough. You've got to engage with real people who are struggling to eat. You meet Jesus in those real people. So it's not enough to be advocates and write policy papers. He said he encouraged us to connect with real people who are struggling to survive. That's where we meet Jesus. He's got, there's a beautiful passage on the piety of uneducated people, popular piety. And I think he's got especially Latin America in mind. And so he talks, I remember this image of a woman who is adoring Mary, Mother Mary, and experiences in Mother Mary the embrace of God, that Mother Mary is with her and for her. And he said, maybe she doesn't get the theology quite right, but who cannot see the preciousness of the faith of these people? And then there's a long section on the evangelization of culture. I think this was an idea that was developed in the Jesuit conferences of the last decades. But what he says is that in order to share the gospel, we need to change our culture, our cultures, our economics, our politics, to conform more to what we believe is true because of the gospel. In the gospel, we believe that God loves you and me and everybody, and we need to change our culture and our economics and our politics to conform most closely to what we think is fundamentally true because of our experience of Jesus. And so what the press picked up was the stuff about, that the market economics isn't everything. But all he's saying there is, if free markets mean that people are sleeping in the streets, you got to fix it. You got to fix it. He said, how can it be that when stock prices go up or down, every day that's news? But if somebody died in the streets last night here in Northern Virginia, that may not be news. How can that be? And then, economics and politics, it follows then. Not that, we'll have different ideas about what are the economic and political changes we need to make to overcome hunger and poverty and deprivation and to conform the world in other ways, more to our experience of God's love for everybody. But there is no question that those of us who have experienced God's love in Jesus Christ need to be about the business of changing the world for God. Now, on hunger specifically, this Pope is asking us to pray for the end of hunger. Caritas International is the association of Catholic charities and Catholic relief services and agencies like that, Catholic agencies like that all over the world. And they, along with many other people in the world, have come to the conclusion that it really is possible to virtually end hunger everywhere in our generation. So most of the world is aiming toward trying to end hunger by 2030. They said, let's do it by 2025. And that is the Pope Francis has endorsed that goal. And he has asked all people to join him in praying for the end of hunger. Pray to end hunger, he says. Now, so it's not just pray for hungry people. It's also praying to end hunger. Bread for the World, we're an ecumenical organization. We work with all stripes of Protestants as well as with Catholic bishops and Catholic institutions. We try to organize Christian people at the grassroots level to speak to their members of Congress. But this idea is so powerful that we've picked it up, and we are encouraging all of our members and other church bodies to encourage all of their members in joining in this prayer for the end of hunger. To tell you the truth, I'm really not great at morning devotions. I miss it a lot, and I'm not great at, I'm an activist. I'm not so good on the meditative side. So what really works for me on this is when it made, I just thought, every time I say, give us this day our daily bread, I can remember that a dimension of that prayer is asking God to actually end hunger. If this is possible, move us in our time toward the end of hunger. And I have found that, I mean, once you get that idea in your head, you can't say the Our Father again without doing it. So, at the Bread for the World table, a couple of my colleagues are with me today, and I hope you'll talk to them as well as me. And there's this Bread for the World table, but there's this little card that's got, give us this day our daily bread. So it's just you could take this home and put it someplace and remember. And if you do it for a while, it'll change your experience of God in a way that the Pope is counseling. So that's what I wanted to say about Pope Francis. What a great way to start thinking about hunger. Let me then back up and just talk about what we know about hunger and how to overcome it. In the world, right now there are about 850 million people who are hungry in the most basic sense. Their bodies don't get enough calories. So forget about fruits and vegetables and meat and potatoes. I mean, potatoes they got. Potatoes or rice or yams or something like that. That's it, basically. But even if they're living on 1 or 2 plates of rice a day, they don't get enough rice to give their bodies the calories that they need to live healthy lives. So if you think about world hunger, the kids in those families die in large numbers. It's still, child mortality's come down in the world, but it's still about 18,000 children every day die from hunger-related causes. Because, in those families, the kids get measles or something, but their bodies are weak, and so they die of measles, or they die of diarrhea, or they die for unnecessary reasons. And then also for the adults in those families, they don't have energy. So, sometimes they look like they're lazy. But they're really making kind of internal calculations about whether it makes sense to go out and look for daily labor today. Whether to spend the time going from farm to farm and try to find someplace where I can get a payment today. Is that worth the effort in terms of the calorie expenditure that it's requiring of my body? So world hunger is a huge, deep problem, and it's related to poverty and lack of water and all AIDS and all the other ailments that affect the poor. In our own country, in the United States of America, we know now from the federal government data, census collected data, that 1 in 7 households runs out of food. 1 in 7. In 2007, before the financial crisis, it was closer to 1 in 10. But since that in 2008, the food insecurity went up 40%, and actually we're fortunate that it hasn't gone up more after that. I think the expansion of charitable efforts, the expansion of the government programs has maintained the level of food insecurity at about 1 in 7. The latest data are 2013. My guess is that the decline in unemployment that we've seen in recent months, that when the next data come out, we're going to see that there has been some reduction in hunger. Because if people can get a job, that's the best way, the most durable, the most powerful way to reduce hunger. But a lot of people cannot get jobs, or they're right on the edge. They get terrible jobs that aren't enough to really take care of a family or provide food security for a family. The typical pattern in our country is usually at the end of the month, people run out of food. So they run out of their food stamps, SNAP, or they run out of their wages. So often it's moms take the brunt, typically. So moms protect the kids. And so maybe the last 4 or 5 days of the month that mom doesn't eat much. She may grab a donut at work. One reason why there's a lot of obesity among low-income women especially is because they go without food, and then when they get food at the beginning of the month, then they may binge eat, or, so women take the kind of food insecurity the kind of hunger we have in America, ironically contributes to obesity, especially among women, low-income women. And then the last 2 or 3 days of the month, the kids also may just go without food. They certainly reduce portions on plates. All month long in these households, people buy less expensive groceries, so there aren't, a lot of the foods that are really good for you are more expensive. But these families, for reasons of economics, but also because maybe they have lower levels of education, they may not buy the best foods. So the damage that this kind of food insecurity does is not as severe as the kind of damage that extreme hunger does in Ethiopia or someplace. But the damage is real. Kids who experience this kind of intermittent food insecurity, especially little kids, it affects their brains. So if from conception to age 2, the brain is forming, and those babies need to be well nourished, because you can see at age 2, you can do, I don't know what you call it now, but a picture of a brain, and the brain of a baby that hasn't had decent nutrition, you can see that it has not formed properly. And that can never be repaired. So it is, if we let little kids and pregnant women go hungry, it cripples our nation for a generation or 2. Because with hunger, some of the maladies that are caused by hunger in a mother go on to the 2nd and 3rd generation. So that the daughter and the granddaughter of a mother who was hungry in utero are affected by that damage. And then for toddlers and for 5 and 6-year-olds, they're meant to be learning machines. But if you don't have quite enough nutrition, it shuts down your brain. So you're dull, or you're inattentive, or you're naughty. So the damage of hunger is terrible. Now, I think the most important thing to know about hunger is that it can be ended. We can end it. And if I may, I'd like to just tell you about a trip I took to Bangladesh a couple years ago. My wife and I lived in Bangladesh early, 35 years ago, and we worked for a Lutheran development organization way up in the northwest corner. We lived in a town of 20,000 called Takargao, and then I spent a lot of time, extended periods of time, in a little settlement called Goria, which at that time was about 200 thatched houses. And so a couple years ago, I got to go back to Bangladesh. Actually, my son, who's now 30, at his own expense went with me back to Bangladesh. And we went to Takargao, and we got to go to Goria. And when I would go to Goria, I would sleep in the home of the primary school teacher, a guy named Mr. Body. His wife was pregnant, and so she was, in the last stages of pregnancy, she was living with her mother. And so his house was empty, didn't have a woman in it, so I slept with him in this big wooden bed. So I really wanted to see Mr. Body and some of the other people I knew from back in those days. And so we went out to Berea, we drove around in a van. Berea's completely changed. It's now a pretty big, prosperous, rural commercial center. I had a hard time, I couldn't believe it. I had a hard time finding Mr. Body's house, but I couldn't get myself oriented. Some young woman had been in his class as a girl, and so she told us where his house was, and we drove there. And on the road coming away from his house, here was Mr. Body, and I recognized him after all these years. So at that time I could speak Bengali pretty well, now I can't say anything. So I got out of the van, but he recognized me right away, and as Asian men do, he took me by the hand and we walked hand in hand back to his house, which is now a concrete block house. It's not thatch anymore. And he was quick to show me that they have filled in the gully where mosquitoes used to breed. And it's just clear that the kids look better nourished. They're in this rural market. There's a variety of foods. Didn't used to be a lot of different foods. There's now a tarmac road that goes from Berea to Takargao. People can take, they're connected to town. They can sell things there. They can get jobs there. Importantly, they have police protection, because when they were isolated from the town, there used to be guys who go around with machetes and they'd break into farmers' houses and just take whatever they had. And there was no police protection out there. And now, they have access to the police and the courts. The women are more assertive. This is not Sweden, but the women are out. They talk. Mr. Body's wife actually said hello. After 35 years, she finally said a word to me. So, and my friends, within 5 minutes of the time we got to Mr. Body's house, there were 6 guys there, But these were the people I used to drink tea with, and I sat up late at night with, years and years ago. And they all said that their lives had turned out much, much better than they could have possibly expected. They're Muslims, so they thank Allah, they thank God that all these blessings have been showered down on them. And we should also be thanking God for what God has done in their lives. And all across Bangladesh, the roads are better, the schools are better, the houses are better. So people are still very poor, but dramatically less poor than a generation ago. I could see it. I could see it. And it's true in many parts of the world. So it's not just China, Bangladesh, but also half the countries in Africa are doing remarkably well. In Mexico and Brazil, there have been reductions in poverty. In Great Britain, when Tony Blair was Prime Minister, the 3 parties agreed to try to reduce child poverty, and they have reduced child poverty. Even now, after their recession, after their budget cuts, there's less child poverty in Britain than there was when they started this work. So what we have seen is that it is possible to dramatically reduce poverty and hunger. In our own country, we've been able to reduce poverty and hunger at different periods of time. The last time we did it in a sustained and powerful way was actually in the 60s and early 70s. To our shame, it was that long ago that we did this. But we had a period of economic growth. People could get jobs. And then, under the presidencies of during the time of Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon was the one who expanded food stamps and WIC. But the country kind of had it. We knew that this was important to us. So we focused on poverty in America. And during that period of time, we cut poverty in half. So this is doable. And it's not just Caritas. The 188 nations that own the World Bank have resolved to commit the World Bank to ending extreme poverty in the world by 2030. President Barack Obama, in his State of the Union message, not the last one, but the one before that, he said, we could really end poverty in the next 20 years. So I think we should rate, I think people in this country have become discouraged. The fact is we haven't had a president since Lyndon Johnson who considered poverty in America one of his top 5 priorities. How can this be? 25% of the people in the country are in church on Sunday morning. But we haven't insisted that our presidents since Lyndon Johnson say that this is at least a priority. It just hasn't been. There's always something else that's more important. Now, how do we reduce hunger? Again, I want to refer to another Catholic document. In 2002, the Conference of Bishops put out a pastoral letter on hunger and poverty called A Place at the Table. More recently, there's a movie out called A Place at the Table. It's a good resource for parishes. But the first place at the table was the bishop's pastoral letter, and it is really good. One of the things that the organizing principle is that they say, in order to make a place at the table for everybody, you need a table with 4 legs. And the legs, they said, are first personal responsibility. So poor people have to work themselves, have to work hard, do the right things, try to stay in school, get married, stay married, take care of themselves. What people do for themselves, that's the main thing. So you can't ignore, work and family issues. Then the second leg is a strong economy. So what many of us do, businesses, entrepreneurs, but lots of people in our work life, we're working in organizations that work effectively to provide jobs for people and services for the rest of society. Businesses and other kinds of organizations. So the economic part, the economic leg of the table is also important. People have to be able to get jobs. So what we do in our work life is a leg of the table. Then a third leg of the table is what churches and charities can do, which is just essential. People, no matter how we organize society, people will fall through the cracks. So what we do to provide emergency feeding, and then not just the feeding, but relationship and counsel and help in getting to the services they need, that is just absolutely crucial, vital work. Before I quit, after a few questions, I want to tell you a story about my son. One of my sons had a lot of trouble with poverty. And I know there are a group of Franciscan sisters in his town, and when he was down and out, he would go there and have lunch. But I think, it was the sisters more than the lunch that was offered there. So what we do, and then what the churches do to help people keep their marriages together, to help kids stay in school. If they open up their church parlors so that AA can meet at church, the AA needs a place to meet. That'll help a lot of people be able to work their way out of hunger. So churches and charities are a crucial leg of the table, and I know a lot of you are involved sacrificially in that kind of work. But then the fourth leg of the table is what government does, which is also crucial. The government can have an impact on whether people can get jobs or not. Is it a priority for the Fed? Is it a priority for Congress and the President? Then the government programs are also dramatically bigger than anything churches and charities can do. Off the charts more important to poor people in terms of volume of assistance than anything we can mobilize in any other way. So protecting and making those programs work is also really important. And the bishops back in 2002 said, in our country we spend a lot of time arguing which leg is holding up the table. But we need 4 legs at the table. Father Creedon suggested that I talk a little bit about private-public partnership, so those 2 legs, all 4 legs need to work together. Those 2 legs clearly need to work together. The government provides a lot of funding for Catholic charities and Catholic relief services, and it should. And on the other hand, I think the most powerful way for grassroots people to reduce hunger in Northern Virginia or in any town right now, any place right now, is to make the federal programs work better. So in addition to passing out a bag of groceries, help people get signed up for SNAP, help people get signed up for WIC, help to set up systems so that the school breakfast program and the summer feeding program are working. I live in Alexandria, and the churches are just now getting organized as Hunger-Free Alexandria, and they commissioned a study, and what the study showed is that we can do a lot more with existing effort if we work together more and work together more with the federal programs to make them do what they're supposed to do. Finally, let me talk about advocacy. I just got to say it's scriptural. I mean, it's really important for practical reasons, but it's also scriptural. Because the God in the Bible is the God not just of our souls, but the God of nations, the God of history. And God cares not just about how we behave as individuals, are we good people, but He cares about how we behave as a nation. When God sent Moses to Pharaoh's court, it was not to take up a collection of canned goods. It was to insist that Pharaoh let the slaves go free. And when the prophets came to Israel and Judah, they went to individuals to say, why are you building those big houses when people are going hungry? But they also went to the kings, to the government of the day, to insist on justice in the land. And our Lord Jesus was concerned about laws. He objected when laws marginalized people or got in the way of healing people. Now, the first century church, they did not live in a democracy. You couldn't write a letter to King Herod, or you couldn't unelect Pontius Pilate, you know. So they didn't have the kind of chance that we have to shape our society. But St. Paul, he is a Roman citizen. He's the only Roman citizen in the New Testament. And he used his citizenship, you remember, to advance the purposes of the kingdom of God. And surely we who are citizens of the most powerful nation in the world, a democratic nation, should use the power of our citizenship to advance God's purposes, including the possibility of ending hunger. It works. Some people think it doesn't work. You know, how can I influence Congress? Kathy Saley, when she was at the Conference of Bishops, and I worked together in leading something called the Circle of Protection over the last 4 years. Because the budget debate of the last 4 years was very dangerous for poor people. When it started in 2011, the House Republicans were proposing to cut $3.3 trillion from programs that go only to low-income people over 10 years. All the private feeding in the country amounts to about $4 billion a year. So what the House Republicans were proposing to cut is roughly 1,000 times that. And then the Democrats were afraid to use the word poverty. They weren't talking about poverty. You remember, they were all about the middle class. When we had a meeting with President Obama, the Catholic bishop who came there said, you know, when in my Bible it says, whatsoever you do for the least of these. He said, sometimes when I hear you talk, it sounds like it says, whatsoever you do for the struggling middle class. He said, anyway, but we organized. The Conference of Bishops chaired something called the Circle of Protection. Bread for the World provided a lot of logistical support. Many church leaders, church people across the country wrote to Congress saying, look, protect funding for programs for poor people. If some of these programs aren't working, make them work, shift them to another program that works better, but we are not spending, we can solve our fiscal problems without cutting programs for poor people. I'm curious, how many of you wrote a letter to any of your legislators in Congress or the Senate on those issues? Yeah, thanks. Right? And basically we won. That's what's, it's been a tough 4 years for poor people, but the federal programs for poor people have been cut by less than $40 billion. So that's significant, but it's about 1% of what the House has been pushing for the last 4 years. We've been able to protect those programs, and because we've been able to protect those programs, they have been a lifesaver for millions of families in this economy. So it's terrible a lot of people can't get jobs, but at least the kids are signed up for school meals. At least they've been able to sign up for food stamps. They don't want that, so what we've got to do is get the economy going again. But what we've done to maintain a circle of protection is really vital. And who has done that? Christians and other people of faith, as much as anybody, not by ourselves. You know, some political leaders have really helped us, but nobody else has talked as consistently, has focused as consistently on how the budget debate might affect poor people. It's a dramatic example that we can make a difference through advocacy. Now, as you get involved in advocacy, you can connect through lots of sources. Through the Catholic Conference of Virginia, they'll send you emails suggesting ways that you can connect on both Virginia issues and national issues. The Conference of Catholic Bishops, if you look at their website, they have, that's a source of information. Catholic Charities USA has also on their website, they'll send you a weekly update on the federal issues that they're working on. SALT is a group here in Virginia that is mainly Catholics that works on Virginia state legislature issues. And then I want to pitch Bread for the World. For 40 years, we've been working Catholics and Protestants together. The fact is, our senators don't really care that much about what resolutions the church adopts. What they care is about what people in the state care about. And when Blessed Sacrament and Christ Church and Westminster Presbyterian all go to see my member of Congress together, he is scared. He realizes this is something he's got to pay attention to. So Bread for the World is one resource. The website is bread.org. Stephen and Chris Ann are here with me, and I hope you'll check us out as a resource that you can use individually, in ecumenical gatherings in Northern Virginia, and also in your parish. We really work to provide resources that help people. You know how to get the blessing of your parish and how to make it kosher. You know, all of our stuff is, I've got 2 Catholic bishops on my board, the Catholic Conference, so we are really careful to fit with with Catholic social teaching. There's nothing there that is going to stray. But in parish, lots of times you can use our resources to help people see that if we're going to end hunger, we need to complement our prayers for poor people, for prayers for the end of hunger, and our service with poor people, our connections directly to poor people with advocacy. Let me stop there and take some questions.
Raise your hands.
You're welcome. Yeah, sure.
I'd like to start just by pointing out something in Joy of the Gospel that I think isn't mentioned. When you talk about, love and mercy for the poor, I think, the church has taught a lot about mercy being more associated with our sins and forgiving sins. But it's much deeper, and meaning is compassion. And I got into a discussion with a couple of seminary classmates of mine and went through the Joy of the Gospel and discovered that there are maybe like 15 different passages where Pope Francis uses the word mercy and really follows it up with compassion for the poor. So I just said something to mention. The other thing is, looking through your pamphlet on the poor, and you make a good case why we should work to end hunger and everything. And then the last page where you talk about giving, you ask people to donate. I think one of the problems we have, I work with a nonprofit that we have to realize that there are a lot of worthy causes, and people give to more than just one thing. And we follow Jesus' example. You know, he gave a priority to helping the poor. And I think it would help your cause if you were more direct in your asking people to give. Say, please make bread for the world a priority in your charitable giving. You know, not because if we say that's the only thing, they may not follow. So
That's helpful. Yeah. Thank you. Both good comments. Yeah.
I have a friend who's a good person, and it's not just her, but a lot of the people I know that just don't believe that people are poor because they're not slackers. You know, like, how do you convince people that there are people who, how do you convince people that there are people in need through, you know, no fault of their own and that do need help?
I think there's a book called My Lord and My God, which was written by the guy who used to be head of the social concerns staffers from the diocese. And just from talking to his colleagues, the main point he makes is what they did is he talked to other social concerns people in dioceses across the country about what really works to move Catholics into social justice. And what they concluded was people need opportunities to meet Christ in the poor. So actually know poor people, work with poor people, but also do it in a context of related to worship and Eucharist and prayer. That is what they say, and I believe that moves us. If you know the poor, if you know people who are struggling, clearly a lot of them are working their butts off. They're working really hard. On the other hand, I think it helps to get to know poor people in the context of worship. Because you can also work at a food pantry and think, damn, you know, why does he smoke? Look how much money he's spending on smokes. And but when we work with the poor and see Christ in the poor, it just takes then you empathize with the poor. You know, then you. I think that's a way to soften the judgmental side. I also think it goes back to experiencing the grace and mercy of God in Jesus Christ. You know, I think one reason why I'm really into this is because I was formed from day one to know that God loves and forgives me. Lutherans are some Lutherans, my mom and dad were good at that. So I just, you know, I know going through the day, I sin over and over and over and over again. So I think people who have that experience of knowing that we're Levi and that God uses us anyway, then you meet somebody who is struggling and you think, get up. If you're looking at the TV, you're not going to solve your problems. You just have the fact that God has forgiven me 20 times a day softens my judgmental attitude when I think how poor people could fix their problems. And and then it also makes us more aware that to the extent to which we contribute to a society in which really hardworking people are treated badly at work, and a lot of people who are working hard can't support their kids. So it's also a question. They ought to work harder, but what's wrong with us that we're allowing a society in which many people who are clearly working hard, are subject to a lot of abuse, and the Bible says if you don't work, you shouldn't eat, and I think that's true. You know, if you just, on the other hand, if you work, you ought to be able to eat, and that's not true in America. Yeah.
I have a follow-up comment about that. I used to work to be a social worker at a homeless shelter, and so I observed many disadvantaged and starving people who were working, as you say, working very hard. I also observed some who weren't. And I think the key reason for that is a psychological phenomenon known as homeless. I think some people, if they try to help themselves, fail, try again, fail, so they stop trying, not because they never tried, quite the contrary, because they have tried, and they conclude that they can't help themselves. So in that case, not only is helping them not decrease their incentive to help themselves, it increases their incentive to help themselves. Someone else will observe that and says, I know you can improve your situation, so I'm going to try to help you improve your situation by taking you in, providing food, shelter, clothing, medical services for you. That increases their incentive to help themselves. It's to think, oh, now I really can't. So I think where I tell anyone who goes to people is, oh, that person doesn't work, therefore shouldn't eat is, what if the reason that person isn't trying is because nobody's helped that person, so that person thinks he or she can't succeed?
Thank you. Yeah.
First of all, I want to thank you for being here with us this morning. But one of the things is, as I read the newspaper and look at the media, it's hard sometimes not to be overwhelmed with the problems of the world these days, and especially poverty. So I was wondering, where do you see hope? What gives you hope for the work that you do?
Actually, I think this line of work there's tremendous hope in this line of work. The world as a whole has cut extreme poverty in half since 1990. This is God. You know, what's happening in Bangladesh is not just Bangladesh, it's all over the world. So, you know, the African leader, there were 47 African presidents in town a few weeks ago. And we were involved in that. You know, the main message, what they want to say is half the countries of Africa are doing just well, thanks. Just fine. 10 of the fastest growing economies in the world are African nations. So there's still South Sudan and Somalia and Central African Republic and the Ebola crisis. But there's also rapid growth and democracy and progress against poverty in places like Mozambique and Ethiopia and Tanzania and Ghana. So, you know, broadly, the fixability of poverty and hunger, the fact that we are making progress, I think this is God. You know, this is God moving in our time. It's not just, those guys in Bangladesh are right to thank God. It's not just that their country did some things right or the World Bank gave them assistance. This is also God answering the prayers of hundreds of millions of really poor people. And so I think we know that with just a modicum of effort, with leadership from our nation, we can certainly further reduce hunger, poverty, disease in the world. And I think we can really get to a point by, say, 2030 when there is virtually no hunger. And if you can do that in Ethiopia, and I think you can sure as heck do it in Northern Virginia. We do not have to have millions of hungry kids in America. It just is not necessary. We know how to make sandwiches. So, it's a matter of organized give a damn. But the fact that we're making a lot of progress, I think, gives us a lot of hope. And then also, the fact that, what the faith community did in the Circle of Protection, that gives me hope because, I think Americans are so discouraged about Congress, and it is discouraging. But we were able to meet with John Boehner and Paul Ryan and Barack Obama, and people like you wrote to Warner and Kane, and to our own members of Congress. Frank Wolf is a board member of Bread for the World. On both sides, we have people who work together to try to protect poor people in the budget debate, and it worked. So I just think there is a lot of reason to be discouraged, but we're too discouraged right now. Also, if I may, on the, people right now are all, we're concerned about all these crises that have broken out. Now, if you look back 5 years, 6, 7 years, a lot of people were dying in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we felt like we had some control over it because we were in those fights. You know, I think what makes people so nervous is that now there are fights going on and should we be in it, you know? But if you look at the number of people dying, it's not clear to me that more people are dying now than were dying 8 or 10 years ago. And then in all of those places, except for in Gaza, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Turkey, the Ebola countries, Central African Republic and South Sudan, all those places, U.S. humanitarian assistance is there. Catholic Relief Service is there. So we are not completely disengaged. In fact, in those refugee camps for Syrians, you know, U.S. food aid, Catholic Relief Services, and other agents of U.S. food assistance are providing some help to people who are displaced by these conflicts. So, and Bread for the World's played a role in making that, getting that aid there and getting it there effectively. So even in those places, I feel like there are ways that attentive people can make a difference in these really discouraging situations. I'm also encouraged right now, you know, with Paul Ryan. He's a good Catholic, and we've had a series of meetings with Paul Ryan over several years, and I'm really encouraged that I don't agree with everything he's proposing, but he's proposing that we deal with the issue of too many people in prison, a lot of nonviolent drug offenses. People end up in prison if they're black or Latino. So he's raising that issue. He's raising the poverty issue. And so is Senator Rand Paul and Marco Rubio. Basically, the Republicans who are running for president are all talking about poverty. And Obama's talking more about poverty than it is for his first 6 years. So if we organize and push in these elections that are just happening right now, for starters, you know, we need to, I'm just curious, how many of you are involved in a campaign helping get somebody get elected? So we've got to do better on that. I think all of us ought to be given time and money to somebody, not that I pick or even that the bishops pick, but that you pick, that you think is going to help us do God's work in the world. And then give him time and money, because we need to, in this election coming up, especially Virginia 10, where Frank Wolf used to serve, that's a big election. It's going to have an impact on the future of the nation and the world. And people like us need to be more active. Let me take one more question, and I want to tell you my story. What? Who? This woman? Who, Bob?
The guy in the green shirt is kind of an outfit.
Okay, green shirt.
What do you think of union movements, especially?
Of who?
What do you think of union movements, especially the McDonald's employees forming unions?
Yeah. Well, he asked, what do you think of union movements, especially the McDonald's employees trying to unionize? I think it's great. We don't do that. That's not what we do. But the issue that they're focusing on is right. And it's one of the most effective ways that that issue of people working hard and not being treated in abusive ways and then not being able to support themselves is an issue that we as a nation have to agree with. And that movement, some of it's organized by the Interfaith Worker Justice Movement. That's another organization that you can give money to. They're doing good work. I think it's good. Let me just tell you about my son, and then I'll quit. But I have 2 adopted sons, and I'd like to tell you about my son, John, who has suffered terribly from alcoholism and addiction. Addiction is a genetic disease. It is a terrible disease. It steals your soul. It turned him into a terrible person. And it also, in the end, drove him into homelessness, and he was homeless, penniless, and in trouble with the law. And even then, when he was at his lowest point, I had to tell him there was nothing I could do to help him. Can you imagine that? I had to tell him, I can't, until you get sober, there's nothing I can do. Go to legal aid, see if you can get a lawyer. So, thankfully, he resolved to get sober. He connected with AA. And also, thankfully, in the town where he got arrested, they have a drug treatment court. So a drug treatment court combines strict discipline with an understanding that this is a disease. So he got calls lots of mornings at 6. He had to call in every morning at 6:30. If they said green, he had to get down to the courthouse by 7:30 for tests for alcohol and drugs. And if he tested positive, they put him in jail that weekend. So this was no nonsense. He had to spend a lot of time in court. But basically, they pushed him into the job market. He's now been sober for 5 years, more than 5 years. He attributes that mainly to his higher power. Amen. He attributes it, he doesn't talk about God the way he's now married to a Catholic girl. So his kids are both baptized Catholics, but I guess they're baptized, but they were baptized in a Christian church. John is more his kind of religion, his understanding of God is more Alcoholics Anonymous. But, does God not answer his prayers because he doesn't say them the way I want him to say it? He is convinced that it's mainly God, as he understands God, that is proved to be stronger than heroin. And then the drug court also helped. So now he's married. His wife had a child when they got married, so I have now 2 grandchildren. He's come up through the abusive, through low-wage jobs. He has a high school diploma by the skin of his teeth, so he sold cell phones, cell phones, and sold cars, and these jobs are really unsteady. A lot of small employers who employ low-wage people steal from them. It is rough. But he and his wife are supporting their family, and they're living okay and loving their children. I'm really, really proud of my son, John. So I tell you this story for 3 reasons. First, when we talk about hungry people, we're not talking about another species. A lot of us, I think about 1/3 of Americans will spend part of our lives under the poverty line. So this is us. This is our kids. This is our sister-in-law. Maybe not you, but it's not far away. It's somebody down the street, somebody you know. So we're not talking about somebody else. These are our friends and neighbors, our family, who suffer from hunger. And what we know for sure is that whether they live on our street or live in Africa someplace, our Father loves them, each one of them, just as much as I love my son John. So this is not something academic. We're talking about people who are beloved by God. Another important part, sort of a lesson from John's experience, is hope. So he was really in bad shape. I had lost hope for my own son. And he is now living a kind of middle-class life, and he's still young. I think, he stands a good chance certainly to show those 2 children great love and to raise them to have a good chance in life. So, hunger and poverty are not hopeless. What you do in food pantries, what you do in programs to teach English as a second language, what you do to mentor kids, what we do through advocacy, we can change things. This is not a hopeless cause. And then also John's case illustrates the importance of public policy. In his case, mainly the drug treatment court. There are only 100,000 people in this huge country that have access to a drug treatment court. If he would have been in most cities, he might be coming out of jail about now. Might be coming out of prison about right now. But because local people organized, one of the judges there has 2 sons who've gone through addicted, so Local people have organized. There's also some limited federal funding for drug treatment courts. There ought to be more. You know, our prisons are crowded with people who are nonviolent drug addicts. There ought to be more treatment available to those men and women. But what it's in my case, John would say, he would say his sobriety is mainly due to God and his own hard work. And I think that's true. But public policy also made a big difference. And advocacy gets a policy, got a policy in place, or can get policies in place that give a better opportunity to people like John. Thanks a lot.